Hey, this is the ActiveState Podcast, episode 3, The Sweet Spot, Balancing Security and Development Speed. I'm Nicole Schwartz, the Senior Security Product Manager here.
Hi, and I'm Martin Drohmann. I'm a tech lead at the extensibility team at ActiveState.
And today we're just kind of having a friendly argument back and forth about all of the tensions involved in balancing security with the speed of development. To quickly let you know about ActiveState, it's an open source management platform that makes it more like a utility for you to consume all your open source securely. And we've been involved in the open source community for 20 years, and we give our product away to any maintainers. So if you are a maintainer, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to give you a free version. I guess I'll start with, what does security want? As a security person, if you've heard of mean time to remediation, that's the time between when a vulnerability gets reported and resolved, we want to keep that minimal. And we've been doing that by pushing security left, ideally so it doesn't get to prod. This means that I've made people like Martin have to start dealing with security scans and dealing with those vulnerabilities, along with some of the new hotness, if you've heard about it, FOSTA, where you get those attestations and SBOMs that we know what it is. But as a result of that, Martin, what's kind of that done to your schedule of how you're delivering things?
I mean, we don't meet that often to review our security vulnerabilities, and I feel like it's structured. It's just a new thing, because in companies that I worked before, that usually wasn't the case that we did this. And I think it makes sense, right? Because for most companies, there's the risk of, yes, a successful product can be attacked somehow, and that is disastrous. But there's also the risk that you don't deliver something that actually makes your product successful. And that's usually what most companies worried about the most. And so as a developer, I always have to keep that in mind, that we can actually deliver the things that have to be done. And that usually means that security comes next.
So yeah, it's about the priorities. You've only got so many hours in a day, and maintaining everything and patching it versus being asked to hit a certain deadline and striking that particular balance.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, as a developer, of course, that's also not something that I'm necessarily excited about. Just updating my dependency it doesn't change anything functionally, right? I'm more excited about creating something new or improving the user's experience, whereas security is something more defensive. However, updating dependencies regularly also comes with a benefit, because it makes it easier when you actually have to update your dependencies once it is a necessity to implement a new feature.
Yeah, because there's like performance improvements, there's new functionality if you're kind of keeping up with the community. Now, from my point of view, what can be interesting is when I look at a vulnerability, I see that it's critical, and I see that there's all these terrible things that could happen as a result. But a lot of times, I'm not necessarily understanding how that vulnerability fits in the ecosystem. And so I'm approaching it just from, it says it's critical and it says these terrible things. But when you get the opportunity to look at it, you might be able to say, we don't call that function, or that's not really an accessible piece of our ecosystem. It's kind of like you were saying, things could be attacked, but if that piece is not reachable from outside or not getting user input, then it's going to be much harder for it to get some kind of overflow error. And so sometimes just being able to work together to really prioritize, not just between product features and security, but of those security bugs, which ones really are the most important to patch. And I think right now it's kind of interesting because a lot of security people don't get trained in development. And at least with the age that both of us are, I think a lot of development classes didn't include a ton of security stuff. So everyone's kind of having to come together and and chat about all of these issues to see which ones really matter.
Yeah, right. And I mean, to me, it's also a matter of tooling that you need for that, because I mean, there's always been tools around that tell me what kind of vulnerabilities are in a certain software that I'm working on. But maybe I looked at it once or twice and just got overwhelmed, or read the
Because there are
CV
so
title and
many.
thought, "Ooh, I don't think that matters." And it doesn't ever matter. So yeah, I think it's a matter of improving the tooling so you can actually reduce the noise and be able to do it, because the developer with the current tools gets too overwhelmed. If you would react to everything there, I mean, I can really tell it because I've ignored those tools for so long now, as they've just annoyed me, but I don't think it would do the company good. So something needs to happen there. And I think we're on a good path, honestly, with how we deal with the ActiveState platform, by just making it at first easier to connect it to the ingredients that you have in your open source. But I think we're also going a little further.
Yeah, we're looking at today our enterprise customers, our BE team looks at a lot of the CVs and then puts comments in there and says that he's not relevant. You don't need to worry about it. And doing that for our customers, like you said, reduces the noise that they have to deal with. And I think we're looking at ways to kind of augment that and make that faster and more scalable so that we can kind of do that for everything. Does this really matter? As an example, when I'm triaging things sometimes, it'll say this only applies if you're using it in a container that's Linux-based. Well, if the customer is using it in a Windows-based system, then they're not going to be impacted. Then we can immediately say not applicable. So figuring out how to help customers, like you said, reduce that noise. Now, you were talking about how if you can keep up to date, that you can get benefits of new features, new functionality. What are some of the things that make it difficult, other than just prioritization, to keep things updated?
Well, whenever you develop with open source software, you're not developing for yourself, right? There, open source software that's the benefit of it. It is developed by hundreds, thousands, millions of developers. But it's also what causes dependency hell, because when I have my application working on Monday and I update my dependencies on Wednesday, there could have been hundreds, thousands of new additions to the open source dependencies. And I will pull them all in on Wednesday. There are, of course, structures in place to mitigate the impact, or describes them behind version numbers. But that doesn't always work properly because it's just too big of a problem, depending on how complicated your dependency tree really is a little bit.
And
But
a lot
for
of
some,
people have a lot of dependencies, so that can be a pretty
yeah.
complex tree.
And also, I think packages become more complicated. Some of them really depend on multiple layers of open source software. If you think of AI applications or just data mining, there's so much going in, different languages too. So there's always something going on. And the bigger the dependency tree, the greater the impact. I mean, if you have a small dependency tree, you might have 10 updates in the open source community between Monday and Wednesday. If you have a bigger one, it could be 100,000 in that time. And yeah, of course, it's impossible then, if something breaks, to quickly say what caused it. Was it on my side, what I did on between Monday and Wednesday?
Or
Or was it
something in the
something
code?
that broke and introduced a new feature? Maybe I just have to change a function name or something. But I always have to figure this out. And sometimes also functionality changes underneath in ways that the open source developers didn't predict, because it was third level update that they themselves didn't know about, right? So they have the same problem actually. that when you're if the change happened layers above what they are developing, their software can also break.
I think the saying that I usually hear a lot is turtles all the way down, because they're relying on open source, and whom they're relying on is also relying on open source. So it's just turtles all the way down.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that's what I call dependency.
Now, our platform, at least for Python and Perl and Tickle and Ruby right now, helps people avoid dependency hell. And the UX team has recently introduced that new report that shows you what changed in your tree. So hopefully that's helpful to people in that situation. We're hoping to expand to more languages soon. But yeah, that we found it an issue. So we're hoping to make it more visible and no more unknowns of what changed. So hopefully that saves people some time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with current tools, it's really difficult to actually see which parts have changed. And then even if you figure this out, you might still have to search the internet, find the change logs. I've ended up, searching until I find the actual pull request that caused my problem and commenting on it. I think there is a push towards we have to update more, which
there definitely is with all of the rise in attacks on the supply chain. I definitely think all security teams are kind of pushing to get updates more frequently now.
Yes. But there's a sweet spot that you have to find, and that will be tricky. And I hope ActiveState can help with that.
I think the interesting thing you're talking about is that it can be very frustrating to have to worry about these updates and prioritize that in with your other work. If security was able to help you reduce the noise and be a little more clear about what the updates were, do you think that would help you argue with prioritization to maybe get a little more time set aside? Because you could say, hey, we know these things are critical. So do you think that type of information would help you kind of argue for more frequent patching instead of having to wait till it gets to the point that you have to do the patching?
Probably, yes. Yeah. I do think so. I mean, I must admit, in the companies that I worked before, there was never really a push for security because it was more in the startup phase. And in the startup phase, as I described before, you don't care so much about that your attacks to your product that you still have to develop, right? Because, what is the danger of attacking a product that you don't sell yet? For you, not very much. Maybe you can lose intellectual property this way, but even that shouldn't be the whole company's focus, right? But I think in the future, with the right tools and maybe some best practices that evolve from there, this will become just more of a standard that hopefully will also improve the update process in general. Because I do believe with what we found here at ActiveState, we've already discovered a few things that really make updating when you have to do it for a feature also much easier. Because you face the same problems of dependency hell. And therefore, some teams even avoid this and would estimate the complexity of a story that involves updating a feature much higher than it should be, I think. Because
they know they're going to get into potentially having those upstream changes that might bite them.
Yeah. I mean, having to change the whole code base, maybe all tests need somewhere a new function call. And then you need to be extra scrutinous about that everything is still working after that. Doing this more often, I think, would really help. Having more visibility in what actually happened in my dependencies, if you can get more towards this as an estimate of how complicated the story actually is. So if you can make more informed decisions there, just seeing, we would need this package, what would actually come in there? And can we maybe even mitigate the effects of downstream dependencies by not updating them, just keeping it more in the state that we are right now. That would be really helpful.
And also, you said something about at some startups, there's not much to protect. And I think sometimes people don't threat model particularly well. And threat modeling is basically where you say, well, this system contains like customer information versus the system doesn't. And it's much more important to fix those vulnerabilities in the system that has customer information or financial information than it
Right.
necessarily is in the other systems. So I think if we had to kind of summarize what you said, it's, hey, let's figure out what systems matter. Let's try and update them. Let's see what that update's going to contain so that it's not necessarily as unknown and scary. Maybe minimize that where possible. And then security right now, hopefully, is arming people with tools like SDA and ActiveState and other systems so that it's not just about CVEs. It's about which systems are squishy, what risks are there, have we hardened the container? There's all these elements. So hopefully working hand in hand, you can make it so that you've put layers of security in. It's not just about, well, did I write good code fast, didn't yell about, or do I have updated dependencies that the FDA isn't, yelling about? It's, well, do I also have it on a hardened container? Did I write it so that my tests are saying, and that's another thing is you've got all these tests, so that'll help you tell if you can update fast or not. But are all the tests also telling me that I'm not letting users put in things that could poison the system and cause a buffer overflow? So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a separate problem.
don't take data you don't need and don't keep data you don't need. As a security person, that's the two things. Don't take it if you don't need it, and don't store it if you don't need it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This certainly needs a different kind of review. And it probably is even important in startups. I think that's something that developers are more educated about, though, already, I believe, over the time.
I think
the last
once you've
decades.
gotten yelled at enough times by the SaaS tool, you kind of learn it whether you want to or not.
Yeah. And we all use cloud services, and the best practices in those documentations are getting better, better communicated, better documented, all these things. So it is becoming more of an awareness. It doesn't prevent supply chain attacks, though.
Yeah. But luckily, which at least ActiveState and our Get Current, Stay Current, we're hoping to help everyone see what's in their supply chain, keep on top of those updates. And like I said, have an impact report so you can know exactly what's going to change, which as you said, then you have that next step of, okay, let's make sure the unit test pass and see whatever else as a result of that. But at least that hopefully makes it a little bit easier, avoid some of that dependency hell. Is there any other things you kind of want people to take away or think about this balancing?
No, I think it's really, the balancing of not wanting to go into dependency hell, being overwhelmed by the information about vulnerabilities, not being able to grasp the depth of it and the applicability to my own application, versus the threat model, right? What comes out of there. So all of the things that I said on the first side are really all of the things that I said at first were really, are really cumbersome. I think the only way to make them less cumbersome is to do them more often. So that's what we always have seen. That was the shift towards it. It's now easier to deploy because we do it all the time, versus deploying just every quarter, every year, or whatever. And that always became a huge mess. So with security, I think it's more, you maybe plan to do it every quarter, but then maybe you don't do it at all. So the only way to bring this in, I think, is to do it more often so that it becomes less of a pain.
And then, like you said, you build that muscle memory as well. So it's not only malware and less intimidating, but you've got that practice that's just a habit. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good note to end on. We just want to tell everyone, feel free to stop by ActiveState.com. We've got the free tier for anyone who wants to just avoid dependency hell and have great portable developer runtimes. If you're interested in our Get Current, Stay Current, where we'll actually proactively let you know, hey, there's a recommended bunch of updates that you should do. So it's in small bite-sized pieces, kind of like we were just talking about. You can check out the Get Current, Stay Current page. And again, as we said, if you do maintain an open source project, reach out. We'd love to give you enterprise version of our product for free. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. Was a good conversation.